finally, all in favor, please, signify by saying aye. Opposed? Passed unanimously. Oh, and I will also mention, if we do have a quorum, of the committee here, I should have mentioned that earlier. We're missing a couple of votes, including the chair. The committee is properly, meeting here today, and I'm going to move on to do the, presentation on groundwater standards for PFAS rulemaking. And I guess Assistant Secretary, Susan May, want to take the lead on this. Very good. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Good morning, members of the commission. My name is Sushma Masemore. I'm the Assistant Secretary for Environment. I wanted to make some introductory remarks regarding this particular rulemaking concept that our team will be presenting today and in the committee following this. You may recall that in May and July of 2020, last year in July 2022, I provided the full commission a brief background on PFAS, PFAS. It stands for per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. We covered a variety of high-level information. We discussed what PFAS are, their presence across the state in drinking water, surface water, groundwater, fish tissue, and other sources. Those unique North Carolina specific PFAS we covered that are unique to North Carolina and that requires a state level review through the assistance of our state's Secretary's Science Advisory Board. We also talked a little bit about those nationally found PFAS chemicals that EPA has been reviewing, has reviewed some of them, proposed standards, and are in the process of finalizing them. So while EPA pursues the promulgation of the national primary drinking water standards for public water systems, I am here to inform this committee that sufficient quality and quantity of scientific data now exists for some of the PFAS chemicals that would allow this committee to consider protecting drinking water supplies at these very same public water systems that the national MCLs or maximum contaminant levels will be required to be met. So today, our staff from both the Water Quality Committee as well as the Groundwater Committee, Management Committees will be presented a concept and timelines. We will bring proposed groundwater and surface water quality standards for your consideration. These rulemaking efforts will enable the protection of the primary routes of PFAS exposure, which we talked about last year. Currently, our best knowledge is that through ingestion, mainly through water, drinking water supplies, and also our knowledge related to consumption of fish tissue are the means through which PFAS enters human body. So as we present these concepts and we proceed through rulemaking, I want to inform you that rooted in our approach from concept to rulemaking to implementation is a commitment for transparency, a commitment for excellence in using scientific rigor, and a continuous engagement with the affected sources as well as the public. We want to ensure that all technically feasible and practicable options are considered as allowed in law and rules to ensure that the required protection of human health and environmental quality are assured. And so in the coming months, our staff will provide regular updates to this committee, as well as through stakeholder engagements on the specifics of the chemicals identified, their human health effects, the exposure levels, and proposed standards. Our staff will also prepare regulatory impact analysis that examines a suite of options from upstream source reduction measures to on-site treatment options and everything in between. As you know, based on the current General Assembly introduced bills, there are a variety of bills that are related to this topic, some that are far along than others in the legislative process that address legacy PFAS chemicals that have been used for decades. Additionally, the most current version of the Regulatory Reform Act of 2023 requires a health assessment and technology evaluation study to be conducted for the discharge of 1,4-dioxane. At this point, this particular version of the bill does not contain broader restrictions on setting surface water quality standards that are required under the Federal Clean Water Act. And that would prohibit or would affect our PFAS rulemaking moving forward. So in one of the things I wanted to convey is that PFAS is a statewide issue and it's a national issue. We are at the department taking a whole of department approach with every division and the department leadership developing and executing joint initiatives. I encourage you to take a look at the DEQ action strategy for PFAS. The link was provided in your agenda. And the 1-year anniversary we celebrated a few weeks ago, where we documented the significant action that had been taken in better understanding how to protect the communities, protect our drinking water sources, and cleaning up existing contamination. The same data that has been collected over the past year and ongoing efforts, some of that you will hear later today, will support the rulemaking proposals that will be brought to you. Addressing PFAS is a priority for the department, and many communities are asking very important questions. We believe that these rulemaking processes are a key step to ensure that North Carolina and our residents are better informed and better protected. So in conclusion, North Carolina continues to lead the way in addressing PFAS. And although some states have already taken regulatory actions related to PFAS, our state has an opportunity to follow the science and the law to develop, through pioneering efforts, the water quality standards that protects our public health and the environment. And I encourage you all to, recommend, suggest things that we need to consider and maintain an open dialogue with our teams. I do want to iterate that, as you heard in the previous committee, and we will continue to hear from our directors, that we continue to be challenged with staff shortages and the resource constraints that we often deal with. But we are making adjustments, seeking internal capacity building as well as external advice and expertise to be brought in. And so I hope this has been helpful, and as we move forward, we'll to discuss more of the technical nuances of the rulemaking process. Happy to answer any questions.
And the annual monitoring that you're going to start doing throughout the state, groundwater, are you including the brownfields piece in that with their monitoring resources and the network and have the brownfields piece wastewater and double that for urban brownfields pieces and double that study?
Well, I would let Director Scott answer the brownfields part. The ambient monitoring presentation you'll hear later is related to the network that the Division of Water Resources maintains. These are series of wells that are across the state that allows us our own access, but partnership access to the wells to understand broader water quality. So we have direct access, and we often take samples. Now those samples are being collected and analyzed for PFAS. I think last year we might have presented with the Lower Cape Feeder how that groundwater testing analysis helped inform the need to require Comores Fayetteville Works to begin assessment in the Lower Cape Feeder 4 counties. So these ambient monitoring wells have been very useful in getting that initial understanding of where the contamination may exist. It's not certainly all the groundwater wells that exist that may provide that understanding, and the brownfield programs is one of them.
Follow-up, please. You mentioned water, upstream water sources, studying that further and rulemaking as we go forward. So the watershed rules, are you going to double that as well with watershed rules and finding out mapping the watersheds and studying for upstream purposes? So in fact, with the studies include the watershed rules.
I will have to come back to that question, and I think it's one of those strategies that will be looked at immediately. The standards apply to dischargers of, so these are effluent standards for industrial as well as municipal wastewater treatment facilities. It is part of a larger question. Currently, the guidance that we have from EPA for the NPDES program will be the starting point, but as a state, I think we need to look at holistically at a potentially at a basin level and a watershed level. Open to those suggestions, and I think our staff will be introducing something behind that too.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, good morning. Good morning, my Vice Chair Carter and members of the committee. I'm Bridget Shelton, the Groundwater Standards Coordinator with the Classifications and Standards branch in the Division of Water Resources. So I'm here today to give you all an overview of the 15A NCAC 02L 0202 groundwater quality standards and to give a refresher of how those standards are calculated in anticipation of an upcoming PFAS rulemaking. So North Carolina groundwater quality standards are the maximum allowable concentrations of contaminants in groundwater, which may be tolerated without creating a threat to human health, or which would otherwise render the groundwater unsuitable for its intended best use. And the best usage of groundwater is defined in rule as an existing or potential source of drinking water for humans. These groundwater standards protect the groundwaters of the state as a resource for human consumption. They are used and implemented in many different programs where groundwater quality has been degraded. The goal of any required corrective action or cleanup is to restore the resource to the level of the standards or as closely as possible. So groundwater standards are not a federal program. They're done at the state level using the rule listed here. They protect the human adult population, and they target ingestion and household use. So unlike surface water standards, for example, they protect both human and aquatic life populations, groundwater standards only focus on protecting human health. So here is where the groundwater standards are located in the rule, 15A NCAC 02L, so chapter 02L. Section 0100 has general considerations, including definitions, and then section 0200 has the classifications and groundwater quality standards, with 0202 listing the groundwater quality standards. This is some language from the 02L groundwater quality standards rule with the rule references listed in the bottom left here. So when there is no standard for a substance that is not naturally occurring, that substance is not allowed at levels above the practical quantitation limit, or the PQL. The PQL means the lowest concentration of a given material that can be reliably achieved during routine laboratory analysis. So the PQL is essentially the lowest level of a substance that can be consistently measured in a lab. When a standard has been established for a substance and the value is less than the PQL, the detection of that substance at or above the PQL is considered a violation of the standard. So if the established health-based value for a substance or the groundwater standard is less than the PQL, or the lowest level that can be reliably measured in a lab, then the PQL value is used as the standard for that substance. So keep in mind that as laboratory analysis capabilities are constantly developing, PQL values can change. And the PQL value is used in implementation when there is no groundwater standard or when we are in the process of developing a health-based value for a substance. The PQL value, again, is a laboratory value. It is not used when we develop these health-based toxicological standards. So here is the criteria we do use when we calculate and develop these groundwater standards. Sorry, I don't know how some of the slides didn't seem to upload. Are those slides showing on that screen? Or, Okay, sorry, I'm gonna re-download it. So the rule lays out how we establish standards and what criteria we are able to look at when we are establishing a standard for a substance. So we look for the lowest of the following 6 criteria or endpoints. So first, the concentration protective of the non-cancer or systemic effects of a contaminant. Second, a concentration which corresponds to an incremental lifetime cancer risk of 1 in a million. Third, the taste threshold limit value, then the odor threshold limit value, then the national drinking water maximum contaminant level, or the national secondary drinking water standard. So the process for developing a groundwater standard for a substance begins by finding these values if they are available. The rule also lays out which references can be used when finding those values listed on the previous slide. So the list of references in order for preferences here. So first, the EPA's Integrated Risk Information System, or IRIS assessments. Second, EPA's Drinking Water Health Advisories. Third, other EPA health risk assessment data. And four, other relevant published health risk assessment data and scientifically valid peer-reviewed published toxicological data. So we are limited to these references when we are developing groundwater standards. So here are the calculations used to develop groundwater standards. At the top there, that's the non-cancer endpoint calculation where we have a reference dose. So at the bottom there is the cancer endpoint calculation where we use a cancer slope factor. So the reference dose and the cancer slope factor are what we are finding in the literature. And then the exposure estimates are listed to the right there. And just of note, anything in red is defined in the rule. So body weight is defined at 70 kilograms for an adult. Water consumption rate is defined at 2 liters per day for an adult. And the risk level used in the cancer calculation is defined at 1 × 10⁻⁶, or 1 in a million. So the rulemaking process for the groundwater standards is shown on this slide here. So available literature and data are reviewed and staff develop a package or a recommendation to take to the EMC committee and then the full commission. This recommendation can include updates to the standards values or new standards based on new or updated information. The EMC decides on whether to approve of any changes to the rule, which then go to public notice in the North Carolina Register and public comment and hearing. We then go back to the EMC for approval. Then, if received, to the Rules Review Commission, or the RRC, for approval. If everything is approved, the rule is then updated. Since, as I mentioned, the groundwater standards are not a federal requirement, there is no EPA approval required, unlike the surface water standards. So once we receive RRC approval, or if we receive RRC approval, the amended rule is then codified in North Carolina state law. So as Assistant Secretary Mazemore has mentioned, PFAS compounds, per and polyfluorinated substances are chemicals of specific concern to North Carolina. New data has been summarized and published recently. We are in the process of evaluating the scientific data to develop groundwater standards using the process I covered today for a number of these PFAS compounds. This is an anticipated timeline of this rulemaking for potentially PFAS groundwater standards. We will be coming back to the Groundwater and Waste Management Committee in November of this year for an informational item to update the committee on the review of the scientific data and the development of these standards. We then plan to present an action item in January 2024 to the committee to proceed to the full EMC if approved. If approved by the EMC in March 2024, we will then go to public notice with the public comment period beginning in mid-April of next year and public hearing occurring in June. The end of the public comment period is anticipated to be in mid-June of 2024, and we will be back to present the report of proceedings to the EMC for approval in September of 2024 next year. So that is all I have today. I'm happy to take any questions.
Any questions on this stuff? On the rulemaking process, from stakeholders. Part of the bank, from these stakeholders.
I'm not sure if I can answer specifically, but we receive comments from anyone that is willing to submit a comment.
There's potential groundwater issues moving forward with this rule. Could they be
First and foremost, with ag land that is fertilized and worked every year, year after year, year after year. Over time, affecting groundwater. Whether it be livestock, whether it's fertilizer for row crops, fruit, vegetables. I think that ag would have to be first on the list as a stakeholder moving forward in the government process. I'm scared of that.
All right. Bob, I move. Like, sure. My assumption is it's still there. And, yeah. Do that, right? Contact. Yeah, feedback. Thank you very much.
Checking these slides here, so we run into the same issue. All right, good morning, committee. Thank you for having me here. My name is Andy Neal. I'm a hydrogeologist with the groundwater resources, excuse me, the groundwater management branch in the Division of Water Resources. And I'm gonna talk to you today about our PFAS monitoring of our statewide monitoring well network. So I'll go through a little overview of what the monitoring well network is and some of its capabilities and the data we've collected from it. I'll talk about our quote unquote background PFAS results from this network on the statewide scale and also focused in the southeastern part of the state. And I'll give you an update on where we are and where we're headed. So as a lot of you probably know that the state of North Carolina relies on groundwater for about half of its drinking water use. So in the 1960s or so, DEQ or its predecessor and all those in between have installed, maintained, and monitored a statewide monitoring well network, which is now up to 700 wells at 235 locations, and we're in 67 of North Carolina's 100 counties. So this was originally done to evaluate climatic or drought conditions and also human-induced influences, whether it's pumping influences or anything like that. We have since began to more recently monitor for water quality parameters, including things like just general constituents like nutrients, metals, and general aquifer chemistry, as well as potential contaminants like pesticides, VOCs, and more recently PFAS. It's pretty small to see up there, but it's a cross section of the coastal plain aquifer system. I'm showing you the basement rock, kind of moving from left to right is from west to east. Just a quick overview of that. You know, basement rock at the bottom, overlain by interbedded or alternating layers of aquifer, water bearing zones, and confining units. And the major or the main drinking water aquifers for the state are the Castle Hayne, Black Creek, and the Upper Cape Fear aquifers. And we have wells in all of these aquifers. And try to have as well of geographic representation and across all these aquifers as we can. And on the left is a picture of a typical well station out in the coastal plain. The little blue pipes there are stick ups from the wells, and each of those is screened within a different aquifer.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. That's, if out on the coastal plain, we have multiple aquifers at one location. So like in that picture there, you have, say, a shallow superficial aquifer well, and below that you might have a Castle Hayne aquifer, and then whatever.
The different depths.
Exactly. So, sorry, I should have mentioned that. Good question. Thank you. So here's where they are located across the state, from Great Smoky Mountains National Park up at Klingman's Dome, all the way out across the coastal plain, out to Cape Hatteras National Seashore on the Outer Banks. So we have wells that are all over the state, primarily focused in the coastal plain region for reasons I've previously mentioned. And from this network, we've collected a lot of data over the years, especially groundwater levels. But on our groundwater management branch webpage, we have access to, I know it's kind of hard to see here, but groundwater levels, groundwater quality, geophysical, lithological data, and also some 2D mapping tools. And I've circled in red here a link to our interactive groundwater quality mapping interface, which allows us to visualize and see spatially how our data look. And it's also a way to share our data publicly. This is public data for the most part. Not only is this data available on our website, it's also available through the U.S. Geological Survey's National Groundwater Quality Monitoring Network. We are one of 36 agencies that contribute either groundwater quality and or groundwater level data. You can see the numbers of wells we contribute data from there. It's about 650 for groundwater quality data and close to 700 for groundwater levels data. So we get a lot of data from this network. And one thing I'll mention about this network is that a lot of these sites are, for groundwater quality, they're in locations that you would think are not, they're more ambient. That's why we call it ambient groundwater quality monitoring, hopefully to not be influenced too much by human-induced impacts. But that's why we started doing this groundwater sampling several years back. So that's a little bit overview of the network. So to get on to the PFAS sampling, as of this month, we've sampled 290 individual wells in 48 counties. That's 115 locations we've sampled, and we've collected about 400 groundwater samples for PFAS analysis. Just to show you locations where we have sampled, the dark circles indicate where we have collected samples for PFAS, and the open circles indicate where we have yet to sample. And the red circle here shows, the big red circle around the southeastern portion of the state shows where we focused a study last year in the Lower Cape Fear area, which I think some of you may have already heard the results from that previously. So the one thing to note here is that in that area, we used an outside lab which analyzed for about 45 PFAS, whereas outside of that, we used our own DWR chemistry lab, which at the time was measuring about 28 PFAS, and they've since increased their capabilities to around 50 PFAS. But just that's something to keep in mind as I go through and show you results. So I'm going to show you a series of several maps with different PFAS on them, and just kind of set the stage for what I'm showing here. This is a map of all the wells and all the aquifers we've sampled, and the scale here, it's kind of hard to see from back in the back, I would assume, but the green circles indicate where we have collected a sample and PFAS was measured, but it was below detection limit. The yellow circle shows where it was greater than the detection limit, but less than 10, and then the red circles indicate where it's greater than 10, and larger circles indicate higher concentrations. So if you look at the map, you can see that even out in the mountains and up in the northeastern part of the state, we see some PFAS in the groundwater in our monitoring well network wells. Down in the southeastern part of the state, again, we have focused our sampling efforts more heavily on this, so it'd be a little biased in that sense, but we do see PFAS in a lot of or several areas there. And this is total PFAS concentrations, so nanograms per liter. And but most of the impacts that we do see are in the superficial aquifer. The more significant impacts are in the superficial aquifer we do see, and then few of the other aquifers, but primarily located in the shallow superficial aquifer, which has contact to the atmosphere and other superficial processes. So moving on to total attachment C PFAS concentrations in the groundwater. Just to clarify what attachment C compounds are, I think most people here may know, but it's from the attachment C portion of the 2019 consent order between DEQ and Chemours. And they are, they originate from that facility, more or less, from my understanding. So we see here, again, we've only measured for this full suite of attachment C compounds in that area within the red circle. So we're not seeing too much of the attachment C compounds. The couple that we did measure for statewide, we don't really see those outside of that area. But within that area, we see a couple sort of clusters there, one in near the plant and around Robeson County, and then along the coastal areas of New Hanover, Brunswick, New Hanover, and Pender counties. Another slide here showing similar information, but a little bit different. This is any attachment C PFAS with a concentration greater than 10 nanograms per liter. And again, it's in the same area down there, more focused around the plant and along the coastal areas of southeastern part of the state. So kind of stepping away from the attachment C compounds, we look at PFOA, which is more widely used and compound that's been around for a while, and it can have various sources. We see, and it's also on the list to be regulated by these proposed or forthcoming national drinking water standards, or MCLs. So you have PFOA. We see that in various parts of the state, typically in lower concentrations, and for the most part in the superficial aquifer. Similarly, for PFOS, we see that fairly widespread, but also in lower concentrations, and again, typically in the superficial aquifer. One thing I'd like to mention too about PFOA and PFOS, anytime we find that it's, not anytime, I don't think, but pretty much anytime that we find any detection of a PFAS, either PFOA or PFOS is in that sample as well. So we rarely find just one PFAS in the sample. I added this here because this is also kind of going along the lines of what is coming down the pipe with the EPA MCLs, whenever that happens. They have proposed the hazard index MCL, which is a calculation based on four concentrations of four different chemicals. That's GenX, PFBS, PFNA, and PFHXS. And we see, again, pretty much in that same area in the southeastern part of the state, we see the exceedances of that MCL, which is 1, or proposed MCL, which is 1. And just to clarify, those compounds were measured throughout the state as well. So we don't see that. We typically just see, or what we have seen are those values increase in that southeastern part of the state where most of our studies have focused. To kind of wrap it all up with a few potential areas of concern. This is looking again at total PFAS concentrations. We have the Robeson County and area near the plant. We have coastal areas of the coastal counties there, Brunswick, New Hanover, and Pender. We have one site out in Beaufort County that had an elevated level of PFOA, and then a site, our Windsor site in Bertie County, superficial aquifer there, had, well, first time we sampled it a few years ago, it had elevated levels of several PFAS, but a sampling from several weeks ago has revealed that those levels have decreased significantly, but we are continuing to monitor that. Look at this busy table here. Really the thing to take away from here and to reiterate is that the superficial aquifer has the most impacts. Granted, we have sample the most wells in that aquifer, but that's where you're gonna get most of your impacts from superficial processes. And the very deep aquifer, lower Cretaceous, which is not a drinking water aquifer, but the two samples we've collected there, we haven't detected any PFAS. So just to summarize what I've just gone over, we've collected a lot of PFAS samples, groundwater PFAS samples from around the state. Detections are widespread, but typically in lower concentrations. And we see the superficial aquifer impacts are usually more significant than they are in the deeper aquifers. And most of the significant impacts that we see appear to be in the southeastern portion of the state as it stands right now, but we've still got more work to do. So which that brings me to, we're continuing to sample wells, moving away from those counties out in the eastern part of the state. And then following that, we'll kind of work our way back across the state until we sample all of our monitoring wells that we're allowed to sample. And all samples collected will now include an analysis of attachment C compounds. And if there's any time that we find unexpected or potential outlier that we see, we're going to go in and resample that well to confirm or refute those results. And as always, we're collaborating across divisions within the department. So that's what I have for you today. Have any questions? No. Happy to take them. Thank you.
Anyone have any questions? Further information?
I think we all want to ask a question.
Go ahead.
The hydrology closure then in eastern North Carolina, would you say with the aquifers, is it different in western, extreme western, in the mountainous areas, and the Piedmont, the lack of aquifers? Per se?
Can you repeat the first part of the
Yes,
question?
is the hydrology composure considerably different in eastern North Carolina due to the aquifers
Yes,
compared to the western, extreme west and people?
yes, sir.
Would you say that's
It's different, yeah. It's big different. You got bedrock out in the western part and a lot in the Piedmont, and you got aquifers overlaying each other in coastal plains. So definitely different.
So you said hazard index exceeds this part in the southeast.
Let me go back.
No, a threat would be, is this will be a state rule moving forward, or is it going to be a regional rule? State.
Okay.
I actually want to caution everyone in the use of this data. It is partial. It's not a complete statewide assessment of what the groundwater data is telling us. So because we started in the southeast, you're seeing potentially a biased understanding of where contamination may exist. So, be cautious about that. We will be collecting additional samples in the Piedmont region and the western region over the next couple of months. Once we have the whole statewide data, we'll have a better understanding of which pollutants are universal across the state. Our suspicion is that we would see some of the legacy PFAS chemicals across the state as the national data set is showing, primarily because those PFAS chemicals were used in a variety of consumer and industrial activities, which are prominent in residential areas as well as industrial areas. And so our data will eventually create a reasoning or rationale for potentially statewide standards implementation.
Appreciate the thought of this, that you explained, that I too, as a company member, can measure the movement between all stakeholders and into the industrial, then if the numbers change, residential, commercial, agriculture, the whole state, and we're setting a rule for the state, then my thoughts moving forward would make sure that the numbers are in reference to those specific map areas that will have influence on the rules and policies that these people have to follow, I think.
I would just like to add two things. One is that the standards, as Bridget indicated, are health-based standards. So the number that will be proposed to you is the application of our current equation that's in our rule, whereby using the human ingestion values, how much water an average person drinks. The reference dose is the scientific value that allows us to calculate the concentration at which a given pollutant may be beyond which or higher than that would be adverse to human health. So that is universal. The question is, what are the impacts of such standard on the potential sources that you are overseeing, whether it's stationary sources or not? And that is an evaluation that we will do with the help of the stakeholder community, which will consist of all of our regulated sources, public and the community that are potentially involved. This data, it provides an understanding of where such contamination may exist. It is probably not everywhere due to the universal use of such chemicals over the past many decades.
One question for Mr. Neal.
Yes, ma'am.
Your slide showing, looking at the presentation, showing sort of three hot spots. You mentioned Windsor and in addition to the New Hanover County area. Are there no sources in those two areas?
We are looking into that. I'm not aware of any. Locally, it could be a very localized issue, but currently I'm not aware of anything.
I think what Andy said is actually true. PFOA and PFAS are related to potentially the use of AFFF. So one of the, in addition to the different types of industrial sources that are identified by EPA and others as potential users or formulators of PFAS, we'll also have to look at routine activities in communities that could have potentially allowed release of that and eventually ended up in groundwater systems.
So it could have been a cumulative effect over a number of years from specific types of activities as opposed to an industrial
Correct.
source.
It may not be as one, responsible party. It may be a variety of potential causes.
Yeah, that's points to the real problem with this in particular comment. But this- These are whole variety. Anyone else have any questions, thoughts, and things with others? Okay, I thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you.
One, the last couple of minutes here, the next thing of the and since I'm here, if the, our storm for every week,
Yes, my understanding is we are still on to have that meeting proposed and that the Division of Water Resources has been taking the lead on making those arrangements. So I believe they've already identified a location and they're also working on some, at least one field trip that would allow us to go out on the water, see some specific issues like some road fire vegetation. And my understanding, I don't know if Mr. Ridings wants to add anything to this, but my understanding is the members of the Coastal Resources Commission and the Marine Fisheries Commission will be invited to join in.
All accurate, Madam Chair, and I'll provide a little more detail tomorrow in my summary comments for the commission. So we'll give you a little briefing update on that as well, where we are with that. So I do not at this time. Thank you.
Just cited mandates that at the beginning of any meeting of a board, the chair shall remind all members